Hello and welcome to Inside America. I'm Selina Downes. On this week's show,
regime change, I'm sorry, Richard, was not part of the original Trump agenda.
Remember, he said help is on the way,
Trump
Peter.
did
help
say,
is on the way. What does that mean?
Trump, he obliterated the enriched uranium. We buried it further.
We now have less sight into what they're doing than we had when that deal was in place.
Iran is the one that has to commit to not use a bomb.
I'd like to bet 3 TRT World mugs that 60 days from now we will be back and not have a signed nuclear deal.
You may be right.
the US and Iran have an initial agreement to end the war. But Trump's key aim of ending Iran's nuclear program is still unresolved. So we ask, is the president backing down?
The U.S. probably has given up more because of how the war played out. So the war was a mistake.
So an agreement is in place, but many of the major issues between the US and Iran are still under negotiation. However, that hasn't stopped all sides putting their own spin on things. Here's a look at what the major players have been saying.
Their nuclear program has been completely destroyed. Their capacity for enrichment, the facilities at which they were using to develop enrichment and develop a potential nuclear weapon, those facilities are still destroyed. The only way that they would ever get any benefit of the bargain is if they comply fully and change their behavior. And so you really have a win-win situation for the United States of America.
The end of the war also includes the withdrawal of Israeli forces from the territories they have occupied, and any attack by the Zionist regime on Lebanon from now on will, in our view, be considered a violation of the agreement.
We reached an agreement with Iran that achieves everything we set out to accomplish, everything and much more. Ending the current conflict, reopening the Strait of Hormuz, and preventing Iran from ever obtaining a nuclear weapon. That's what it was all about. No, we're going to bomb the hell out of them if they violate the agreement. I don't want them to. I want them to honor the agreement.
Well, joining me now is TRT World's North America correspondent John Brain. John, how is President Trump framing this agreement?
Well, it'll be no surprise at all to be told he's framing it as a huge victory for himself personally and for the United States in general, and indeed the world, the global economy, everything. But I think it was very noticeable in that rambling news conference he gave at the end of the G7 that he knows it's not the victory that he's claiming, that he was very much on the defensive with that, blaming the media in advance, saying that the media are going to portray this as a defeat. They would portray it as a defeat if I got a great deal. They'll portray it as a defeat if I resume the bombing. I can't win. I think that's more than anything an acknowledgement on his side, a tacit acknowledgement that this just has not panned out the way he expected. And if you look at what his war aims were to begin with and how they've evolved and in most cases disappeared over the conflict, you'll see why. I mean, he talked in the first instance about regime change. It was a chance for the people of Iran to rise up because they would have new leaders. Well, regime change clearly did not happen. If anything, the regime has become emboldened. He talked about unconditional surrender. Again, that certainly did not happen. And if any one side could be perceived to have won this conflict, if you can talk about winners and losers, then I think most people would say it's Iran that's emerged stronger. He talked about destroying the ballistic missile program. In US intelligence says 70% of that has still survived or been re-established. And Trump's now saying, well, Iran should be allowed to keep ballistic missiles because the other Gulf nations have them. So quite an extraordinary turnaround, really. He says he's got this promise from Iran that they'll never develop or procure a nuclear weapon. Iran's always said it doesn't intend to have a nuclear weapon. The international community, of course, doesn't believe Iran, but that's been their pledge. It was their pledge under the Obama deal, for example. and enriched uranium, yet he's sort of been putting that further, kicking that into the long grass. This will be discussed in the 60 days. And meanwhile, according to the memorandum, sanctions will be lifted. There'll be a $300 billion investment potentially available for Iran. No matter how he portrays it, it's not really an American success by any measure.
I mean, he was increasingly frustrated. We know, don't we, that Iran didn't capitulate against the might of the US military. What do you make of how the president has handled Iran throughout this whole process, and indeed just throughout the second term of his presidency?
He's misjudged it. I think he went into Iran, into this conflict, overconfident, largely because of what happened in Venezuela, the huge success of that operation to seize Maduro, and the way that the Americans have now worked with the rest of the Venezuelan regime. He thought this, well, look, this is the US military, it's most powerful, let's use it again. So total overconfidence, a misunderstanding of Iran, that for them, survival was always going to be victory. His idea that, well, we're bombing them, we're killing their leaders, surely the leaders that are now in place will want to survive. He completely misunderstood that, and he ripped up the Obama deal. He said it wasn't fit for purpose, it didn't keep the world safe. Well, looking back, I think most experts will say whatever ultimately comes out of this 60 days, at the very best it'll be equivalent to the Obama deal, and probably not even as secure as that deal.
And where do you think this leaves the US-Israel relations? We know there have been heated phone calls between the two. President Trump has said Israel has to start acting more responsibly. Where does it leave the relationship there?
It leaves that relationship looking vulnerable for the first time, really, since the State of Israel was founded and the US was the first nation to recognize it. I mean, certainly it's one of the biggest crisis points between the two. There was the Suez Canal episode, of course. But I think Netanyahu has been left hung out to dry by Trump, hasn't he? And Trump's been talking in terms of Lebanon being a problem, just a small problem, which the Israelis are jeopardizing the whole deal, in his view. He's attacked Israel for destroying whole apartment buildings when they're going after one Hezbollah target, and for retaliating when a couple of drones land in an empty field or a bit of desert. He's saying, why do you have to retaliate to that? I think it's undermined the relationship between the US and Israel, and there's a real rupture between Trump and Netanyahu now, and it could have real damaging political consequences for Netanyahu. Trump doesn't seem to care about that now. He wants this deal with Iran to be secured. He does not want the Lebanon situation and Israel, of course, to jeopardize it in any way.
John, thank you so much. John Brain, our North America correspondent. Always great to get your insight. Well, the war has been largely unpopular here in the US, with rising prices hitting Americans in the pocket. And many Trump supporters have been disappointed by the president's involvement in a foreign war after campaigning on completely the opposite policy. I went out to ask people what they think of this tentative agreement.
Well, I think this is a deal that was achievable before the war. And actually, the U.S. probably has given up more because of how the war played out. So the war was a mistake. The president has cobbled together this opposition to Obama's deal that he's now having to fight against to sell his own deal. So there is a level of self-defeating rhetoric that the president has used.
I think he's done the best he can. I think that he has a certain approach to doing things, and I know he likes to make a deal, and I know he likes to negotiate and all of that. But I think in this circumstance, I wish he'd be a little bit more forceful.
I don't really trust much what the vice president or president say.
Why are you skeptical?
You need proof. Yeah, there's a lot of skepticism. Just don't believe his word, just like Iran doesn't believe his word.
Everybody wants peace. Everybody's exhausted. We are done with the war and everything.
Well, President Trump is insisting that Iran cannot restart its nuclear program, but no formal agreement on that is in place, and the Strait of Hormuz is still largely under Iranian control. So, does Iran actually hold the upper hand in these negotiations? Well, to discuss this and more, I'm joined by Richard Goodstein, the former political strategist for the Clintons, and Peter Roff, contributing editor and columnist at Newsweek. Thanks so much to both of you for joining us here.
Good to be here.
Both sides are claiming this is a victory. Richard, can it be a win for both?
No, and here's how you know it's not. Let's remember on February 28th, when the U.S. and Israel started the war with Iran, Trump had 4 objectives. He was quite clear about taking away the nuclear capacity, eliminating the missile capacity, undermining the ability to support proxies, and supporting the population, overthrowing the regime. I think you could go no check, no check, no check, no check. I mean, the nuclear capacity is very much TBD. We don't know what's going to be agreed to, but if past is prologue, we know the Iranians are going to stretch this out. My personal forecast is, notwithstanding what Trump will say, that he'll be lucky to get his deal as good as Obama got.
Well, in fact, Obama himself has said that. The former president has said he's doubtful that President Trump can get a better deal than the JCPOA.
What do you expect him to say? Do you really expect Barack Obama to concede that Donald Trump could do a better job of getting a deal with the Iranians than he did? Of course not. Barack Obama handed them tons of cash in exchange for a mythical promise that was not verifiable. What we have now is 60 days for Donald Trump to get a verifiable agreement on nuclear weapons, which is the most important piece. Regime change, I'm sorry, Richard, was not part of the original Trump objectives.
Remember, he said help is on the way, Peter.
Did
help
say,
is on the way. What does that mean?
Trump did say that if the Iranian people rose up against the tyrants that oppressed them, that America would come to their assistance.
What does help is on the way mean to the people being slaughtered?
Unfortunately, because 40,000 Iranians were slaughtered by their own government, there wasn't the popular uprising that people hoped would arise. But to judge Trump for that is not fair.
Well, then
you can judge him on the ballistic missiles, and we blew them up.
When he said help is on the way, what did he mean?
What he meant is, if you stand up against your own government, we'll be there to help you take it down.
Right,
and
so there clearly hasn't been regime change.
But he has not taken his eye off the ball on Iran getting control of getting its own nuclear weapons, which they have committed to using as first strike weapons against their enemies.
Well, the president has also said he will decimate an entire Iranian civilization as well.
And he said he obliterated them last June. So come on, are we taking what he says seriously?
He obliterated the enriched uranium. We buried it further. It shouldn't be there at all. Because, Richard, you and I both know that if Iran gets a nuclear bomb, it will not only threaten the United States, it will threaten all of the GCC countries.
The fact of the matter is, we had inspectors from the International Atomic Energy Administration on the ground until Trump kind of tore up the JCPOA. And I know every Republican loves to deride that because it was Obama's and because Trump's a genius. But the fact of the matter is, we now have less sight into what they're doing than we had when that deal was in place.
No, I like to deride it because I think it was a bad agreement. And if it hadn't been a bad agreement, President Obama would have submitted it to the Senate for ratification, but he knew that even the Democrats wouldn't vote for it because it did nothing to prevent Iran from getting a weapon. But that's the objective here. What it set up was a position where Iran, like North Korea, would engage in perpetual blackmail against the United States. You give us money, we won't build a bomb. You give us money, we won't build a bomb. Well, that doesn't work. And there are only so many countries we can pay off.
But from all reports, all Trump is buying is the ability to say, we're not going to have them have a weapon for 10, 15 years. That's what the JCPOA did.
You can't, first of all, you can't trust all reports. Secondly, Trump's not saying that at all. Trump's saying permanently.
Well, that was in the first line of the JCPOA.
Iran may say differently.
Yeah.
Iran is the one that has to commit to not use a bomb if it wants to be welcomed back into the family of nations around the globe and stop being treated like a pariah.
Let me talk about that for a second. Until 2010, there was free commerce that Iran had with the rest of the world. And yet, that didn't exactly keep them from developing the nuclear capacity that they were developing before the JCPOA was in place. So this theory that Trump and Vance have, that somehow by bringing them back into the, the family of nations, and they're going to be,
so you
economic partners.
You want to keep them isolated.
I'm saying that
you want to keep them isolated.
I'm saying that since this war started, there are about 20 leaders in Iran right now. 17 of them are these principalists. They're devoted to the principles of the revolution. 3 of them believe this notion of economic integration and so forth. But the 17 have the upper hand, and they're all IRGC.
I think the number is reversed. I think there are about 17 people who are in the political leadership who want to face global reality.
Isn't there an argument that making countries economically stable and secure and prosperous makes them less aggressive?
Yes. And my point is, until 2010, Iran was engaged with the world. There weren't these sanctions. And did that stop them from saying death to America, death to Israel? No. So I'm just saying, I think it's a fallacious theory.
Iran's been at war with the United States since 1979. Okay, these people have long memories, and they don't give up. And they want the Saudis, the Qataris, the Turks, the United Arab Emirates, the Omanis, and the Bahrainis all under their thumb.
And thanks to this war, they are. So the way, first of all, let me just say one thing. This notion that Trump in 60 days is going to get a deal, I'd like to bet 3 TRT World mugs that 60 days from now we will be back and not have a signed nuclear deal.
You may be right.
Thank you.
You may be right.
So then you're conceding that it's fiction.
No, I'm not conceding that it's fiction. I'm conceding it may take more than 60 days.
Okay. Here, and can I just say one thing? Here's the way Iran now looks at the world that it didn't before February 28th. It now sees itself as one of 4 global powers: U.S., China, Russia, and now Iran says, hey, we control that region.
Right.
We know it's under our thumb. We've shown that.
One thing is clear, and that is that this war has helped Iran realize the strategic value of shutting the Strait of Hormuz. Is that its weapon now?
I don't think it's disputable that Iran has look, I think the old regime, they weren't prepared to kind of hit back. This was now or never time. This was existential. And they said, okay. So we fired thousands of missiles at all the neighboring countries. We closed the strait. The world economy took a hit. And frankly, what they lost on the battlefield, they won in the households of the United States when people went to the pump and watched the news and they saw this was a losing proposition.
I wanted to hear what Richard said before I gave you my answer, because the price of gasoline still didn't get as high as it was when Joe Biden was president. So that's the first thing. People don't like to have to pay higher prices for gas, but if they know they're getting something out of it, like additional security, I think they're willing to make that sacrifice.
Right, okay, so the US maybe didn't bore the brunt
I blame
of
President Trump for not articulating effectively why we were in this war. It was the right war at the right time. And I blame him for not articulating it and for just taking it as an assumption that people understood it. They don't understand that
Why was it the right war at the right time?
Because
there was no direct imminent threat.
Iran has been killing Americans since 1979. There was no way to stop them, because at one point, if we took them on, we invited the Russians into the region. Then we had to deal with Iraq. We don't have Russia anymore. We don't have Iraq. Iran is flat on its back economically. And the economic war that's been led by Scott Bessent, who is probably the most able member of the president's cabinet, is keeping the Iranian economy on its back. They can't pump oil. They can't pump oil because they've got no place to put it. They've run out of storage space. And it's going to be an interesting guess as to whether or not they can restart those oil fields without the American technical expertise necessary. They also closed the Strait of Hormuz, which got everybody who was inclined to support them mad. And they're not going to put up with that again. The Chinese are not going to put up with this again. The Chinese were far more affected adversely than the United States was by the closure of the strait. So were the British and the French, who are bravely planning some kind of international effort to keep the strait open, a violation of international law, closing the strait. And they want to keep it open, but only after this war is over. They don't want to defend their own interests. They don't want anything, Starmer and Macron don't want to be seen doing anything that looks like it benefits Trump, because they'll get killed politically at home. They're cowards. They're behaving like cowards. They're ignoring freedom of the seas. They're ignoring their international obligations, and they're ignoring their own interests because of their domestic political situation.
And here's how you know that the price of gasoline is making a difference. Because the fact of the matter is, had the price not gone up 50% since February 28th, Trump would not be basically putting out throwing in or holding up the white towel of surrender, because it's the American public, again, sees what's happening. Look, I love it when they talk about the price of gas under Obama. Thank you, Mr. Putin, Trump's bud. Putin attacks Ukraine, and guess what? It wasn't just the U.S. that had inflation. UK and France and Germany had inflation higher thanks to what Putin did in Ukraine by decimating that country. This was not Biden's fault.
When he attacked under Obama or when he attacked under Biden?
This war was war of choice because Trump was full of himself after Venezuela. Oh, look what we did with Maduro. We suffered no losses. We got him out. And he thought, oh, we can do that. And how do I know? Because Bibi Netanyahu told me that. And here we are. Bibi Netanyahu also said the regime was going to actually be defeated and the people would take over. And of course, that tends to be nonsense. And we know that the current head of CIA is telling him, don't expect this regime to basically make a deal with you.
I mean, we know Israel isn't happy with Lebanon being included in the understanding, potentially commenting on the US-Iran agreement. Netanyahu said he and Trump do not always see eye to eye. We know there have been heated conversations, phone calls between the two. Where do you think this leaves US-Israel relations?
I think U.S.-Israel relations are strained. I think that's understandable. I think that the Americans don't understand the threat that Hezbollah poses to the continued existence of Israel. The problem here is that we've fallen into the trap of, in exchange for getting negotiations, of forcing Israel and Lebanon to negotiate. And Lebanon alone can't be part of this negotiation because the Lebanese government, of which Hezbollah, the political party, is a part, is under threat from Hezbollah, the militia. You could start a civil war in Lebanon, which is the last thing anyone needs.
One thing that this war has also highlighted is that the Gulf countries have realized that the US security umbrella is fallible, but it can't guarantee protection. I mean, can US allies count on America?
Absolutely. I think they absolutely can, and I actually think that this whole thing has pushed them closer both to the United States and Israel. I mean, Israel may be some kind of an existential enemy, but Iran bombed them. Iran attacked them with drones. Iran tried to blow up their oil wells. Iran has made its objectives clear, and it has provided what I think is a platform for peace moving forward, where the GCC and Israel are at least engaged in some level of behind-the-scenes, very quiet cooperation to contain the Iranian threat. And I think that's a big plus, frankly. I mean, UAE and Israel are not being secret about how they're cooperating. I think other nations may be doing likewise. And I think that's a long-term positive benefit because Iran is the real enemy.
And Selina, I actually think that question you pose is kind of a central one. And my answer is totally different from Peter's. I think those countries in the region, yeah, they didn't like getting bombed, but they realized the U.S. did not protect them and won't. And therefore, distasteful as it is to kind of make some sort of semblance of peace with the Iranian regime, the alternative is worse because the U.S. has demonstrated they can't because they didn't protect them when the chips were down. So I actually think it enhances Iran's standing in that region with all those countries, which is not incidentally inconsistent with the idea of some of them becoming more economic partners of Israel. I think two things can happen at once.
The Vice President, J.D. Vance, says the agreement will fundamentally transform the Middle East for decades to come. Do you agree?
No, because again, he assumes that he and Donald Trump are uniquely insightful, that somehow or other their sixth sense, their feel for this is like something that no politician, Democrat or Republican before them, has ever had. The fact of the matter is, presidents since Jimmy Carter have worked from the premise that some sort of economic engagement could bring Iran into the family of kind of normal countries, and it hasn't worked that way. But somehow or other, J.D. Vance, because he thinks that the sun came up in the east and that was his doing, that somehow or other he singularly and Trump are going to make that happen. I just don't see any evidence of it.
Rising above the tit for tat of American politics, we don't know what the final agreement looks like. We have an agreement to talk about coming to a deal, and it may take more than 6 months. But I do think it has the potential to totally change how America looks at the Middle East, how the Middle East looks at America, and how they look at each other. And I do think that ultimately the GCC states and Israel are going to come out of this conflict more united together, looking at the regime that is in charge in Tehran right now, recognizing that it is not only a threat to Israel, it is a threat to Sunni Islam, to all of the moderate and secular Islamic states, including Turkey, because they think they're apostates, and apostates need to be destroyed. And I think that they have a better window into that now, that some of these countries have actually been hit by Iranian missiles. You know, they say the missiles were just shooting at the American defenses, but I was over there recently. They weren't just shooting at the Americans. They were sending a message to the other Gulf states. And that message was received loud and clear. But the message that was received loud and clear is, you're our enemy too.
Right. They've borne the brunt of this war largely, you could argue, because of their...
Which is why I approve of the White House idea that we unfreeze the Iranian assets and use it to pay Qatar and the UAE and Saudi and Egypt and Bahrain and Oman reparations for the destruction that was caused by the Iranians before we give any of the money to Iran. I don't think Iran's going to agree to that.
All right, thanks so much for both of you. We have to leave it there. Thanks so much. Great discussion. Great to hear both of your views. And that is all we have for you on this program. Join us next time on Inside America.